Number 1. The Tunguska Event. At 7:14 a.m. on June 30, 1908, a giant explosion shook central Siberia. Witnesses close to the event described seeing a fireball in the sky, as bright and hot as another sun. Millions of trees fell, and the ground shook. Although a number of scientists investigated, it is still a mystery as to what caused the explosion. The explosion is estimated to have created the effects of a magnitude 5.0 earthquake, causing buildings to shake, windows to break, and people to be knocked off their feet even at 40 miles away. The blast, centered in a desolate and forested area near the Podkamenaya Tunguska River in Russia, is estimated to have been 1,000 times more powerful than the bomb dropped on Hiroshima. The explosion leveled an estimated 80 million trees over an 830 square mile area in a radial pattern from the blast zone. Dust from the explosion hovered over Europe, reflecting light that was bright enough for Londoners to read at night by it. While many animals were killed in the blast, including hundreds of local reindeer, it is believed that no humans lost their lives in the blast. The blast zone's remote location and the intrusion of worldly affairs, World War I and the Russian Revolution, meant that it wasn't until the 1927, 19 years after the event, that the first scientific expedition was able to examine the blast area. Assuming that the blast had been caused by a falling meteor, the expedition expected to find a huge crater as well as pieces of the meteorite. They found neither. Later expeditions were also unable to find credible evidence to prove the blast was caused by a falling meteor. In the decades since this huge explosion, scientists and others have attempted to explain the cause of the mysterious Tunguska event. The most commonly accepted scientific explanation is that either a meteor or a comet entered the Earth's atmosphere and exploded a couple of miles above the ground. This explains the lack of impact crater. To cause such a large blast, some scientists determined that the meteor would have weighed around 220 million pounds, 110,000 tons, and traveled approximately 33,500 miles per hour before disintegrating. Other scientists say that the meteor would have been much larger, while still others say much smaller. Additional explanations have ranged from the possible to the ludicrous, including a natural gas leak escaped from the ground and exploded, a UFO spaceship crashed, the effects of a meteor destroyed by a UFO's laser in an attempt to save Earth, a black hole that touched Earth, and an explosion caused by scientific tests done by Nikola Tesla. Over 100 years later, the Tunguska event remains a mystery, and its causes continue to be debated. The possibility that the blast was caused by a comet or meteor entering the Earth's atmosphere creates additional worry. If one meteor could cause this much damage, then there is a serious possibility that in the future, a similar meteor could enter Earth's atmosphere and, rather than landing in remote Siberia, land on a populated area. The result would be catastrophic. Number 2. Cicada 3301. This seemingly simple message started a modern-day digital treasure hunt involving a series of puzzles posted online for would-be crackers to decode, each harder than the last. It also gave birth to a storm of questions, paranoia and conspiracy theories that have grown with every passing year. Welcome to the world of Cicada 3301. Puzzles around the world. It's no exaggeration that the group was looking for highly intelligent individuals. The first couple of puzzles were a mere taste test of what was to come. A basic knowledge of cryptography simply wasn't going to cut it. When opened in a text editor, the first image revealed the following: VS Clavtub Caesar says LXXT33M2MQKYB2GSQ3Q equals WO2NTK. Even casual puzzle lovers could realize that this was a basic Caesar cipher, which simply involves shifting the alphabet over a few characters and matching up the letters. From there, a stenography, concealing a file, message, image, or video within another file, program called outguess could be used to derive another message, leading to more puzzles that involved the likes of book codes, medieval Welsh poems, obscure quotes, encrypted emails and even a phone message, which you can listen to below. steganography, number theory, philosophy, mathematics, classical music and obscure existential literature have all been included in 3301 puzzles. In fact, one included the poem written steampunk writer William Gibson, which was only ever published on a 3.5 floppy disk. The slightly spooky telephone message wouldn't be the last time that the game bled into the real world. Cicada flyers with QR codes popped up across several continents and puzzlers had to work out the coordinates to find them. There was even one in Sydney. Unsurprisingly, codecrackers were banding together in the hopes of solving the puzzles, one of the most notorious known as number decipher. Cooperation was eventually quelled when 3301 directed solvers to the deep web. The final puzzle required visiting a website through Tor, a web browser that is favored by those seeking online anonymity. Alleged winners have since reported that the website instructed them to create a new email address. They were then contacted by the group with individual RSA puzzles. Once they solved that, their final challenge was a MIDI puzzle that had to be solved with a substitution cipher. One tone represented a letter. What happened then? People weren't entirely sure what happened next for a long time. Nobody was talking, and those who were late to the game found the Tor website to simply state, "We want the best, not the followers." Eventually, some alleged solvers of the 2012 puzzle began to come forward. One of the most notable is Marcus Warner, who was a 15-year-old homeschooled kid and one of the members of Number Decipher. He has stated that on 28 February 2012 he received an email that led him to a deep web forum with other successful puzzle solvers or recruits. He wasn't sure what he was getting himself into. He still had no idea what 3301 actually was. A government agency? Cyber terrorists? A cult? Google? And what were their intentions? What were they going to find now that they had reached the end of their path? Paranoia was understandably high. Even during the puzzle-solving process it had been difficult to trust anyone. Fake puzzles and false information was already being spread during this time to throw others off the true path. Warner claims that he and the other recruits demanded to know who 3301 were, and the answer was far simpler than they expected: a group of like-minded individuals who believed in freedom of information and individual privacy. They claim to have no affiliation with the government, military or a specific organization. Warner says that 3301 was split into decentralized cells, known as broods, and that each one had no knowledge of any of the others. Their cell, Subbed Brood B0H, were instructed to develop software that aligned with 3301's ideology. This resulted in an idea that would protect whistleblowers, after being inspired by Chelsea Manning, a military intelligence analyst who disclosed almost 750,000 military and diplomatic documents to WikiLeaks. Known as the Cicada Anonymous Key Escrow System, CAKES, this software would automatically publish sensitive information online if a whistleblower was out of action for a designated period time, whether that be because of incarceration or death. The software never did come to fruition though. Supposed members of 3301 would comment on the group's progress, but by the end of the year work on the project had all but dried up. In fact, it seems that the 2012 winners were abandoned. Warner reported never having any contact with the 2013 wave of puzzle solvers, and that the deep website he had been logging onto to collaborate on CAKES eventually disappeared. Who is Cicada 3301? To this day, we still don't know. No information written on the subject can be trusted or verified. Even a leaked email from one of the 2012 winners doesn't reveal much, other than that 3301 is an international group who believe in privacy for the individual, oppression must end, and that censorship should be eradicated. The only thing we really have to go on is the group's PGP signature, which they use for all of their messages. With fake puzzles and clues being thrown around to throw people off the scent, or to simply troll, this is the best way to verify when something is actually from 3301. But that still doesn't tell us much. Warner has, however, revealed the supposed etymology behind the name. 3301 was chosen because it is a compelling prime number, a twin prime number both forward and backwards. As for the cicada, this was allegedly inspired by periodical cicadas, who only appear every 13 or 17 years. Again with the prime numbers. Unsurprisingly, in the few short years since it has been in the public eye, 3301 has developed its own mythology and a plethora of conspiracy theories, including claims that they're occult. This theory has been fueled by the particular texts and quotations the group has used in their puzzles, such as Aleister Crowley, runes, Buddhism and Grail myth. This belief has been further encouraged by an anonymous poster in a 3301 dedicated Irk channel, who appeared on the first anniversary of the original puzzle appearing. Now known as the Warning by 3301 fanatics, the post was written by someone who claimed to have been part of 3301 for over a decade, after being vetted in person and warned people to stay away. They also claimed that the group was a religion disguised as a progressive scientific organization. What gave people pause was that the post was made mere hours before something familiar appeared on 4chan. Of course, this could be nothing but a coincidence. After all, it made perfect sense for the 2013 puzzle to kick off on the same date as its predecessor. A group that is dedicated to privacy and cryptography may never be truly discovered. But that doesn't mean you can't try. In the very least, you can get one step closer by having a crack at their 2017 puzzle. Maybe you'll be the one to crack the code. Number 3. The Mystery of the Green Children of Woolpit. Sometime during the 12th century, two children appeared in the village of Woolpit in Suffolk, England, seemingly out of nowhere. These were no ordinary orphans. The boy and girl spoke in an unknown tongue, sported strange clothing, and only ate raw beans. Oh, and their skin was green. The Green Children's story began when they emerged from one of the wolf trapping pits for which the town is named. The pits, designed to lure and ensnare dangerous wolves, were likely at least twice as tall as the children, and a couple hundred square feet in area. A reaper discovered the pair and took them into town, where Sir Richard de Calne gave them a home. In time, they lost their viridescent pallor and diversified their diets, though the boy became increasingly depressed and sickly, before succumbing to illness and dying. When the girl learned to speak English, she relayed the story of their underground homeland, St. Martin's Land, where everything was green, and it was always twilight. According to the girl, the boy was her brother. In one version of this story, she said that the siblings had been herding their father's cattle when they heard a loud noise and suddenly found themselves at the bottom of a wolf pit. An alternate report states that the children had followed the herd into a cave and had become disoriented. The sound of bells led them out, but when they emerged from the cavern, they did so in Woolpit rather than St. Martin's Land. Historians have stitched the Woolpit narrative together from the reports of Ralph of Coggeshall and William of Newburgh. Although neither man had first-hand experience with the Green Children, and their second-hand retellings differ in their details, the overall story is the same. Ralph was a sixth abbot of Coggeshall who lived in a nearby county, and had repeatedly heard the story from Richard de Calne himself. He wrote of it in the Chronicon Anglicanum around 1189. Monk and historian William of Newburgh's Historia Rerum Anglicarum also contains the story of the children, though he was more removed from the incident both physically and in time. His version was published circa 1220, and reportedly came from many trustworthy sources. Even if you prefer one account over the other, a larger question remains: is this story a folk tale or some botched version of actual history? If the story is based on actual events, there are a few plausible explanations for the green tint. One theory is that the children had arsenic poisoning. The story goes that their caretaker, an earl from Norfolk, left them to die in a forest near the Norfolk-Suffolk border. Another more likely, and less depressing, culprit is chlorosis, a type of iron deficiency spawned from malnutrition that leads to a greenish complexion. Yet another, and perhaps most likely, theory postulates that they were the children of Flemish immigrants who were persecuted and killed, possibly in the battle at Fornham in 1173. Fornham St. Martin was a nearby village, separated from Woolpit by a river, and just a few miles from Bury St. Edmunds, where loud bells often chimed. It's possible that the children had been orphaned, suffered a poor diet, while lost and on their own, and eventually made their way to Woolpit from Fornham St. Martin by following the clanging bells. Whatever the children's origin, the sister eventually became integrated into English society. She was baptized and allegedly later married a man at King's Lynn, possibly an ambassador of Henry II, though conflicting reports say she became rather loose and wanton in her conduct. She may have taken the name Agnes Barr, though as with most things in the story of the Green Children, there's simply no definitive evidence. Number 4. The Voynich Manuscript. The Voynich Manuscript, a 15th century document full of undeciphered writing and a variety of cryptic illustrations, has invited its fair share of conspiracies. Named for 19th century Polish bookseller Wilfrid Voynich, it has been suggested to be a Victorian forgery, the Guide to the Philosopher's Stone, real or scam versions, and even the work of a lonely alien adrift on Earth. But Nicholas Gibbs, an expert on medieval medical manuscripts, says the answer may be far more prosaic than any of that. In an article in the British Times Literary Supplement, Gibbs explains that the manuscript seems to be made up of Latin ligatures, a kind of shorthand. Ligatures were developed as scriptorial shortcuts, he writes. They are composed of selected letters of a word, which together represent the whole word, not unlike a monogram. The ampersand, and, is a common example. Its design incorporates the letters E and T, which spell the Latin et, meaning and. Each symbol in the text represents a whole word, rather than a single letter, Gibbs says. Challengingly, however, any possible index to these abbreviations is missing, making the script resistant to interpretation, at least for now. The Voynich manuscript appears to be some kind of medical encyclopedia, with detailed information on which herbs in what quantities can cure gynecological conditions. Its information, Gibbs writes, seems to be drawn from standard treatises of the medieval period to form an instruction manual for the health and well-being of the more well-to-do women in society, which was quite possibly tailored to a single individual. So much for the conspiracy theories, which may date back to its eponymous owner, who claimed it had previously belonged to 13th century friar and philosopher Roger Bacon. Bacon had a history of using a cipher in his work to hide it from the watchful eyes of the church. This all led to the belief that the manuscript had deliberately been written in a secret code and was hiding something important. This, in turn, made it very popular with cryptographers. During World War II, prominent codebreakers spent time trying to unlock the work, but failed to find any meaning. Some people concluded that it is just gibberish. As recently as 2013, researchers believed that it was mostly likely a hoax. There have been numerous encrypted texts since the Middle Ages, and 99.9% have been cracked, Klaus Schmidt, a cryptographer, told the BBC. If you have a whole book, as here, it should be quite easy as there is so much material for analysts to work with. That it has never been decrypted is a strong argument for the hoax theory. But Gibbs told the Times of London that it is extraordinary that such an easy solution had not previously been suggested. Human beings are not naturally complicated, he said. They look for shortcuts all over the place. If you are writing something, you don't want to spend your time writing the same thing repeatedly, so you have indexes. The manuscript needs an index to work. Number 5. Taman Shad Somerton Man. On the morning of 1 December 1948, an unidentified man was found dead on Somerton Beach just south of Adelaide. He is usually referred to as the Somerton Man or sometimes the Unknown Man. 6 weeks later, a suitcase apparently containing the same man's property was retrieved from Adelaide railway station's cloakroom, where it had been deposited at around 11 a.m. the day before his death. However, apart from 3 items marked Keen, and T. Keen, nobody with that name was missing. Nothing indicating the man's identity was found in those belongings. Tucked into a tiny fob pocket in the dead man's trousers was a small scrap of printed paper ripped out of a book. Mysteriously, it contained the Persian phrase Taman, i.e., "it is ended," or "the end." This was quickly recognized as being the final words of the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, quite a popular book at the time. And then some months later, a particular copy of the Rubaiyat surfaced with part of the final Taman page removed. It was claimed that the book had been thrown into a car parked near the same beach where the man had been found. At this point, the mystery of the case was compounded by the discovery of some faint writing on the rear page of the book. This included a local phone number, X3239, and several lines of cipher-like writing. Careful analysis of this suggests that it is more likely to be an acrostic, i.e. the first letters of a text or poem, possibly as a mnemonic aid for remembering it, than a cipher, because its letter frequencies are more similar to the letter frequencies of the first letters of English words than to those of normal English text. The phone number X3239 turned out to be that of a nurse called Jessica Ellen Thompson, née Harkness, living at 98 Glenelg Street, not far from the same beach. When quizzed by the police at the time, she said that she did not know who the deceased was. All the same, when she was later shown the plaster cast bust of the dead man, she was completely taken aback, to the point of giving the appearance that she was about to faint. Feltis, P178, giving rise to a strong suspicion that she knew more than she was letting on. She did tell police that she had independently given a copy of the Rubaiyat to a man called Alfred Boxall, who she had met at the Clifton Gardens Hotel in Sydney in 1944, while she was training to be a nurse at the nearby Royal North Shore Hospital. However, Boxall quickly proved to be very much alive and living in Maroubra, and not the dead man found on the beach, leaving both him and the police somewhat baffled. Just Justin? Up until Thompson's death in 2005, this was as much as anyone knew. However, in a 2013 interview for the Australian 60 Minutes Current Affairs TV program, her daughter Kate revealed that her mother had told her that she indeed did know more about the Somerton man, but had deliberately not revealed it to police. She also revealed that her mother was able to speak Russian, suggested that her mother may have been involved in some spy-related activity, and that her mother thought that the whole Somerton man affair was above a state police level. This has, of course, unleashed a torrent of speculation, though with not a shred of external evidence to back any of it up. Also, one unusual feature of Boxall's copy of the Rubaiyat is that the nurse had apparently signed it Justin, though her name at the time was actually Jessica Ellen Harkness. By way of resolution, Kate recently commented that, when nursing, all the other nursing pals in her year called her Tina, because she was only 4 feet 11 inches and slim. Christmas cards sent to her in her later years from her nursing pals either said Dear Tina or Dear Tina. Seen it as they were put on display at home. Mum said it's an easy explanation, put Jess together with Tina and you have Justin. Jerry Feltis confirmed that, when many years ago he talked to various RNSH nurses who knew Jessie Harkness, they also said that she sometimes referred to herself as Tina. However, getting from there to Justin still seems something of a stretch, if not an outright leap, so perhaps there may yet be more to be uncovered here. In many ways, the whole Taman case is a perfect murder mystery. Murder insofar as the coroner suspected poisoning, but was not able to prove it, to the point that there's no way of knowing whether a murder actually took place. Many people propose suicide as an explanation for many features of the mystery: who the victim was, what the murder weapon was, if indeed it was a murder, or who the perpetrator was. Yet a curious feature is that despite having been found with his head propped up against the seawall, the dead man's body had extensive lividity, blood pooling, at the back of the head, suggesting that his body had spent some considerable time after dying with the head in a quite different position, i.e. lying on its back face up, yet with the head slightly below the rest of the body. Oddly, there was a half-smoked cigarette in his mouth on the beach, which, when taken together with the lividity, would strongly suggest that the corpse had been actively posed by person or persons unknown. This combination of facts would seem to rule out suicide. Even so, useful and actionable facts about the case remain painfully few, very far between, and continue to be difficult to connect with each other. It's true that if we could identify the man himself, we might possibly gain enough context to understand his cipher, but based on the evidence we currently have, I think the odds would seem to be strongly against either mystery being resolved anytime soon. But we shall see. Number 6. The hunt for Lisseau Blanc. On the morning of May 8, 1927, Charles Nungesser and François Colli took off from Le Bourget Field in Paris in their Levasseur PL.8 airplane, hoping to complete the first successful non-stop transatlantic flight between Paris and New York. Their two-seat, open-cockpit biplane, painted white for easier recovery in a crash, was 31 feet in length, constructed mostly of canvas and wood, and loaded with 3,800 liters of fuel, enough to keep it in the air for approximately 42 hours. Despite premature reports in French newspapers trumpeting their historic achievement, Nungesser and Colli never made it to New York, and their plane, dubbed Lisseau Blanc, or the White Bird, was never recovered. 86 years later, the search goes on in the waters around Street Pierre, a tiny French-owned island with a colorful history located 10 miles off the Newfoundland coast. Nungesser, the pilot of Lisseau Blanc, was an aristocrat and French flying ace. Colli, his navigator, was a mariner and former infantryman who had lost one of his eyes in an earlier injury. The two men were competing for the Orteig Prize, a $25,000 reward offered by a New York City hotel owner for making the first non-stop flight from New York to Paris. Their planned route would take them across the English Channel and over parts of England and Ireland, before heading across the Atlantic. After passing Newfoundland, Nova Scotia and Boston, they planned a historic landing in the waters near the Statue of Liberty, the world's most prominent symbol of Franco-American friendship. To cut weight on the 3,600-mile flight, the two aviators reportedly carried little more than canned fish, bananas and rum with them. No radio was on board. When Lisseau Blanc failed to appear in New York, various theories suggested the plane had gone down in the Channel, over the Atlantic or somewhere between Newfoundland and Maine. But joint search efforts by the U.S. Coast Guard and the U.S., French and Canadian navies turned up nothing. Charles Lindbergh, another competitor for the Orteig Prize, later famously wrote that the two Frenchmen vanished like midnight ghosts. For his part, Lindbergh took off in his own famous craft, the Spirit of St. Louis, on May 20, 1927, from Roosevelt Field on Long Island. On the night of May 21, he made a victorious landing at Le Bourget, where he was mobbed by a huge crowd celebrating his coronation as an international hero. For the last 4 years, members of an organization called La Recherche de Lisseau Blanc, the search for the White Bird, have been searching for remnants of the ill-fated plane in a specific location, the waters around the remote, tiny island of Street Pierre, located about 10 miles off the southern coast of Newfoundland. According to the organization's founder, Frenchman Bernard Desser, storms forced Nungesser and Colli to veer off course over Newfoundland, an attempt to see landing off Street Pierre in heavy fog. Desser cites archival records showing that 13 witnesses heard or saw the plane heading south along Newfoundland's eastern coast on the morning of May 9, along with later reports of debris in the area. To further bolster his case, Desser found a Coast Guard telegram in the National Archives, dated August 1927 and describing what appeared to be wreckage of a biplane floating off the coast of Virginia. He says this would have been consistent with a Street Pierre crash in May. Despite its location, Saint Pierre actually belongs to France. At the time of Lisseau Blanc's historic flight, the island was a hub for bootlegging operations during Prohibition in the United States, 1920-33. Montreal merchants would ship liquor to the island legally, after which speedboats would shuttle it off for distribution in the northeastern United States. In fact, one past theory of the disappearance goes that the U.S. Coast Guard may have shot down Nungesser and Colli's plane by mistake, thinking they were rum runners. Desser and his colleagues brought some high-tech artillery to their latest search last month, including a powerful magnetometer and a multi-directional sonar unit. Yet despite combing through 180 feet of water for 3 weeks, they found nothing. During their visit, Desser organized a wreath-laying ceremony for the two flyers, attended by Lindbergh's grandson. Despite the skepticism of some street Pierre locals and the uncertain future backing by his sponsors, including the French government and Safran, a French aerospace and defense company, Desser has no plans to abandon his search for l'Oiseau Blanc, keeping hope alive that this mysterious chapter in aviation history may yet find its resolution. Number 7. Elven An Antenna. In 1964, while trolling the depths to photograph the ocean floor, the crew of the oceanographic research ship USNS Elven An made a startling discovery in the waters near Antarctica. Amid the countless prints of vast terrain 13,500 feet beneath the waves, one picture contained something that no one could imagine: what appeared to be a large antenna, anchored to the seabed. News of the object spread quickly, as did theories of its origins. Some thought it fell off a ship or was placed there by the Soviets, while others insisted that it was extraterrestrial, but the answer turned out to be much closer to home. According to the 14 Times, this photo of the object, which came to be known as the Elven An Antenna, first appeared in the New Zealand Herald in 1964, calling it a puzzle in the ocean floor. Early speculation ran wild as to who could have produced such an complex-seeming piece of equipment and was able to lodge it in the sand over 3 miles below the surface of the ocean. One writer described it an incredible piece of machinery, very similar to a mix of a TV antenna and one telemetry antenna, leading some to believe it likely fell off a boat. Others contended that it would be impossible for such equipment to descend to the depths undamaged and become so well positioned in the ocean's choppy waters. A biologist aboard the Elven An named Dr. Thomas Hopkins, perhaps one of the first to see the photograph, speculated that the long object, with several protruding spokes, was in fact some form of plant life. This, of course, was quickly dismissed due to the fact that no light can reach so far beneath the surface. Still, Hopkins couldn't deny the man-made appearance of the mysterious antenna. "I would not say that the thing is made by man, because this claim raises the issue of how it would get there," said Hopkins. "But it's very symmetrical, and the spokes are 90 degrees apart." As the strange discovery continued to puzzle the scientific community, retired airline pilot and UFO enthusiast Bruce Cathy proposed a theory that the antenna was actually some alien artifact. "The shape of the object and the angle of its spokes," he said, "fit it precisely into a formula he believed extraterrestrials used to control humanity." The nodal points of the two grids, when joined by series of small and great circles, formed what I have loosely termed polar squares around the north and south geographic poles. It was when I carried out a geometric and mathematical analysis of these sections that I found a direct connection with light, gravity and mass equivalence in a harmonic sense. As the Red Scare ended and pages of dubious pseudo-scientific theories yellowed over time, some might have thought that the origins of the Elven An Antenna would remain a mystery through the ages, until researcher Tom Demarier set the record straight. It turns out that the object, which seemed like some piece of advanced technology or alien broadcasting device, was actually discovered in 1888 by Alexander Agassiz and was not an antenna at all. Rather, it was a species of deepwater sponge called Cladorhiza. Later, the sponge's strange appearance drew a similar comparison from scientists Bruce Heeson and Charles Hollister, who, studying Agassiz's drawings of the creature, said it somewhat resembles a space-age microwave antenna. As the news of the true origins of the Elven An Antenna spread, and nature was given due credit for the creature's odd design, some in the pseudo-scientific community expressed disappointment that their alien artifact had been debunked. It all goes to show that, while the human imagination can invent new worlds full of strange, fascinating creatures, there's no shortage of such things on this world as well. Number 8. The Mystery Ghost Rockets of Scandinavia. In 2015, a revealing documentary hit the mainstream. Titled Ghost Rockets, the film opened up a phenomenon that residents of Sweden had experienced since the aftermath of the Second World War. The project, led by the chairman of UFO Sweden, Claes Bond, conducted extensive investigations into the strange sightings. Many hundreds of incidents of these ghost rockets occurred in the mid to late 1940s alone. Some reported even seeing these elongated rocket-shaped crafts entering various lakes and bodies of water. However, all efforts to find even a trace of debris or some other indicator of their presence was fruitless. More mundane explanations offered was the sightings were nothing more than meteors burning up as they entered the Earth's atmosphere. However, the sheer weight of reports that clearly describe machine-like craft counters this considerably. Not to mention the claims of the objects changing direction in mid-air. In the summer of 1980, while walking along the banks of Lake Nemaher, Liz and Boberg were witness to a strange rocket-shaped craft. The metallic object flew over their heads before it made a sudden U-turn and headed straight for them. Before it reached their location, however, it descended into the water, disappearing from their sight. The sound of the craft caught their attention first. Lisberg describing it as a swooshing sound that made her think a Soviet cruise missile was overhead. That was until they saw it stop and perform the 180-degree turn. As he suspected, Bo and Lisberg have not heard anything about what they witnessed that afternoon. As they would find out years later, they were just two of many people who had witnessed very similar objects. As peace finally took hold of Europe for the first time in the 1940s, people were still in alert mode from the years of fighting. In particular, the years of aerial bombardment heightened this alertness. Although Europe was for the moment largely at peace, a new Cold War was developing. The Communist Soviet Union literally walled off their part of Europe. They operated in complete secrecy from the evils of the West, something which made the West suspicious. Perhaps because of this, many of the initial sightings caused much panic in the populace. Many would think they were under attack from the Soviet Union as much as aliens from another world. The first recorded sighting took place on 9 June 1946 over Helsinki, Finland. A strange light shot across the sky, accompanied by the sound of thunder, visible for around 10 minutes. The following evening, it appeared again, only this time, it performed a complete turn in the air. It then shot off back in the direction it had arrived from. On 15 July, a strange lighted object shot through the skies over Oslo. The incident occurred an hour before midnight and played out in front of multiple people. Witnesses quickly discounted that it might be natural phenomena due to the completely straight line the object went along. In less than a minute, it vanished from sight. The following evening, strange lights, named ghost rockets by the media, appeared in Rogaland, Norway. One witness stated that they had seen the object over the Usken River. Sightings of the ghost rockets would continue throughout the decades, with no adequate explanation forthcoming. Although incidents were reported throughout Scandinavia, the vast majority appeared to take place over Swedish airspace. In response to the wave of sightings, the Swedish government formed a dedicated committee to investigate the phenomena. Strangely, several months after these investigations began, Swedish newspapers began to stop printing reports of such sightings. Some suspected that this was at the behest of the Ghost Rockets Committee group. Reports of these incidents in Sweden still regularly appeared, however, in other European countries' media. It was around this time that the official Swedish government stance on the mystery sightings was that they were Russian. This is a notion that is very likely incorrect, for reasons we will look at shortly. In 1984, 4 years after the aforementioned sightings of the Bergs, Sweden officially declassified their ghost rocket files. Upon examination by interested UFO investigators, over 1,500 reports were available. All locked away within these files since the sightings began just after World War II. Many of these files still have reports to follow up, where possible. So it might still be the case that new evidence may still come to light. that the sightings began in the immediate months following the Second World War's end, given this literal wall of secrecy that the Soviet government had put on their activities, was justification enough that they were behind the sightings. This theory doesn't really stand up to scrutiny, however. Given the huge continued presence of the American military on their doorstep, not to mention the depletion of their armed forces due to war, it would not make sense that the Soviets would want to draw attention to themselves, particularly if it was weapons they were testing. They could do in complete secrecy in private in the wilderness of Siberia. And a sound an explanation that meteors are responsible, witness statements suggests otherwise. So this leaves realistically two possibilities. The first, that the ghost rockets are secret military tests conducted by Western governments. The second, and perhaps most controversial, they are the product of another, non-human intelligence. There is one other point to consider. The amount of witnesses that see the object over, or even submerge in rivers, lakes and other bodies of water. Many ufologists believe there is a connection to strange sightings over water and alleged hidden underwater alien bases. Might this be why no debris is ever found? By the time searches are conducted, the object has made its way to a hidden destination. At the moment, that is just one of many theories as to what the ghost rockets are. But as it stands at the moment, theories are all that we have for this strange unexplained phenomenon. Number 9. Wenceslao Miguel. Miguel was a Mexican suspected of being part of the revolution. He was arrested in March 1915 and was sentenced to death by firing squad where he was shot 9 times with the last bullet at his head. He was found next to the corpses, lying unconscious but alive. He received medical attention and walked away. No one is sure how he was able to survive. Sentenced to execution by firing squad during the 1915 Mexican Revolution, Wenceslao Miguel survived despite being shot 9 times. The final coup de grace, a bullet shot through his head by an officer to ensure death. His story of survival was so incredible that it caught the eye of Robert Ripley himself. Pancho Villa was one of the most famous leaders of the Mexican Revolution. After his defeat by the Constitutionalists in 1915, northern rebels faced harsh punishment by regional de facto armies. One of the unfortunate casualties of war was Wenceslao Miguel. Branded as a traitor, Wenceslao was sentenced, without trial, to her execution by firing squad. During the Mexican Revolution, a firing squad was the preferred means of execution. The squad was comprised of 9 soldiers who would all fire their weapons at the same time. The 10th shooter, an officer, was to aim at one of the prisoner's vital organs and deliver the coup de grace, the kill shot. This was Wenceslao's lucky day. March 18, 1915. The Federales took their positions and fired, even the 10th. Assuming he was dead, the job was done, or so they thought. Wenceslao survived. Although in excruciating pain, he waited for his executioners to leave and, miraculously, left the scene to make his way to safety. Though horribly disfigured, Wenceslao Miguel went on to live a full life and became legendary thanks to Robert L. Ripley, founder of Ripley's Believe It or Not. He appeared on his 1937 radio show and at the Cleveland, Ohio, auditorium. He was dubbed El Fusilado, the executed one. Number 10. The Black Dahlia Mystery. Nicknamed the Black Dahlia, Elizabeth Short was born in Boston, Massachusetts, on July 29, 1924. 22 years later, Short, an aspiring actress, was brutally murdered in Los Angeles, California, her body cut in half and severely mutilated. Her body was found on January 15, 1947, in a vacant lot near Leimert Park. The Black Dahlia's killer was never found, making her murder one of the oldest cold case files in LA to date, as well as the city's most famous. Elizabeth Short, best known as the Black Dahlia, was born on July 29, 1924, in Boston, Massachusetts, the third of 5 daughters born to Cleo and Phoebe May Sawyer Short. Cleo Short abandoned the family when Elizabeth was 5 years old. At a young age, Short developed a strong affinity for cinema. By her teens, she had set her sights on becoming an actress. By the mid-1940s, Elizabeth Short was living in Los Angeles, California, working as a waitress to support herself while dreaming of catching her big break into Hollywood's acting scene. Her chance at stardom, however, would never come. In January 1947, a horrific tragedy occurred. At the age of 22, Short was brutally murdered in Los Angeles, her body cut in half and severely mutilated. Her body was found, nude and posed, by a local female resident on January 15, 1947, in a vacant lot near Leimert Park, on the 3800 block of LA's South Norton Avenue. It was pretty gruesome, Brian Carr, a detective with the Los Angeles Police Department who has long worked on the Dahlia case, later said. I just can't imagine someone doing that to another human being. In addition to dissecting and mutilating her body, Short's killer had drained her corpse of blood and scrubbed it clean. The case quickly became heavily covered by the media. Her moniker, Black Dahlia, became widely known shortly thereafter, as it was used more frequently than her real name by the press. The case itself took on a life of its own, Carr said. Early on, I think for 2 months it was front-page news in all the local papers every day. An in-depth, lengthy investigation by the LAPD ensued, leading to a number of false reports, including several false murder confessions, and ultimately leaving detectives grasping at straws. The sole witness of the murder had reported seeing a black sedan parked in the area in the early morning hours, but could provide police with little else. The combination of faulty witnesses and a lack of hard evidence surrounding the case greatly hindered its progress, and, despite numerous allegations and leads over the years, the Black Dahlia's killer was never found. Today, the Black Dahlia murder remains one of the oldest cold case files in LA, as well as the city's most famous. In early 2013, the Black Dahlia case returned to the headlines. An article in the San Bernardino Sun detailed a more recent investigation of the case that was conducted by retired police sergeant Paul Dosti, author Steve Hodel, and a police dog named Buster with a keen sense of smell, specifically that of decomposing flesh, which he was trained to detect. According to The Sun, the investigative team has uncovered incriminating evidence against Hodel's father, Dr. George Hill Hodel, who the younger Hodel has long believed to be the Black Dahlia killer. In February 2013, the team conducted an extensive search of the doctor's home, where Buster had previously detected the scent of human decomposition in several areas of the basement, according to reports. Following their search, soil samples taken from Dr. Hodel's home were reportedly submitted for lab testing. Other evidence against George Hodel, according to his son, includes an old recording of a conversation between the doctor and an unknown person, during which Dr. Hodel allegedly stated, "Supposing I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary because she's dead. Can't talk